So my name is Ignácio Cano. I am a senior lecturer at the State University of Rio de Janeiro. I lecture on research methods, and then my research areas are violence, human rights, and public security. What the long-term impact of the UPPs is going to be, we don't really know. The bets are open, and there are many different scenarios. They are not an unprecedented experiment, because we have had in the past similar experiments like the GEPAI, community policing in Copacabana, community policing in Providencia. But it is the first time that the state is investing heavily on that. And it is the first time that the state is saying this is a model to follow. In the past, these experiments were literally experiments. And police thought that they were strange things, not real policing. And that, okay, they did this as something on the side, whereas now the idea is this will become normal policing in poor communities in the future. Whether this will be so or not, it's on the cards. Recent research by colleagues of the Universidade Cândido Mendes has shown that 70% of policemen who work in the UPPs would rather work in normal battalions and not in UPPs. This tells you that there is a severe crisis of legitimacy within the UPPs. There is a lot of resistance within the police force towards the UPP. Many policemen still think this is not real policing, and all the resources go to the UPPs, so many policemen are resentful of that. So the bet which is on the table, and it's a big bet, is whether we can use the UPPs not just to reduce violence in these 18 or 20 or 50 communities, but if we can use the UPPs to change, on the one hand, the way police conduct themselves, police doctrine, police training. Up till now, the highest reference of policing is the special units battalion, which kills hundreds of people over the last few years. And this is considered to be elite police. So we have to change that, and we have to show them that elite police are those that get into dangerous circumstances without producing any casualties, both for themselves and for the public. This is a big challenge, because it's not just the police, but many people in Rio de Janeiro, politicians, journalists, and normal citizens, still think that policing means getting a machine gun, going to a place where there are criminals, and shooting and winning so-called war. Now we know, for example, from our own research, that in some areas of UPP there is still drug dealing going on. But it's the drug dealing that you would find in most countries. It's low profile, no guns, at least not big guns on display. You phone them, they bring the drugs to your door. That's what you can expect almost anywhere in the world. And that's what we would encourage, that we don't have the illusion that crime is going to stop. We even think, I personally think, that decriminalization of drugs would help, but that's not going to happen overnight. So what we would expect is that crime reorganizes itself, and rather than disputing territory, the root of most of the violence is the dispute for territorial control between the criminal gangs and then between the gangs and the police. So if you can operate without territorial control, then there is no need for such degrees of violence. So the big challenge is, can the UPPs have an effect beyond the local environment? If the answer is yes, then we might really see a very different landscape in the city. If the answer is no, then we're in trouble, because at the present pace of expansion and given the constraints, there's no way we're going to have UPPs in 900 or 1,000 poor communities. So that is the challenge. Actually, there is I think a romantic view, a very naive view, that once the UPPs were in, then peace was automatically installed for good, and that we would not have any violent event. There are a few paradoxes, very interesting ones. For example, there is the impression in some quarters now that domestic violence is on the increase in these areas, because first, people are more willing to go and report to the police, which they weren't before, and second, because before, the drug dealer or the leader of the militia exercised very authoritarian social control. And if you beat up your wife, you might be beaten up very severely or expelled from the community, or worse. And no, that doesn't happen, of course. So I think people are not very realistic about the expectations. We social scientists are used to looking at these issues in terms of rates, for example. And in terms of rates, the rates seem to be extremely positive. The reduction of the number of violent incidents, shootouts and lethal victims is spectacular. But that of course doesn't mean that you will not have some first cases of violence, even some shootouts with the police, though they should be now, and they tend to be very occasional rather than regular as they used to be before. And then there are many unresolved issues which the UPP has not tackled. There are many people who are critical of the UPPs, as you know, and then say things like, oh, police are very authoritarian. Of course they are. They've always been. Oh, there is no respect towards funk music. Of course there's not. I mean, unfortunately, the authorities in Rio de Janeiro seem to believe that funk in itself is a crime, and they treat funk music as a criminal music, and that has to change. But that was not invented by the UPPs. That has been so for decades. The relationships between the community and the police are difficult. Of course they are. So, again, I think that there is an unrealistic expectation that the UPPs will just magically solve everything. And because the government, of course, is selling the UPPs as something almost miraculous and selling it to other countries, the president of Brazil is saying that we'll expand it to other states. They already have UPPs in Bahia, for example. So any negative event that happens seems to threaten this golden image. So I think we shouldn't have such a golden image. We should be more realistic, and we should be prepared to deal with crises and sometimes violence. But if the levels of violence have decreased the way they have, we should be happy with these results. And I think there is a second stage to which we haven't got yet, which is once we have, quote-unquote, pacified these communities, we have to change the relationship between the communities and the police. For example, the UPPs are not community policing, and the heads of the UPPs will tell you so, even though in some places the sign says community police group. But the heads of the police, the UPPs will tell you it's not community policing, and it's not at all, for two reasons. One is community policing requires that policemen and policewomen on their beat take decisions, are autonomous, relate to people. That's not what happens. They're very centralized structures. One reason being that policemen, policewomen are not trusted. There is a lot of fear that there will be corruption. So that's one reason why the structures are so centralized. But there's no autonomy on the part of policemen and policewomen. And the second reason why it's not community policing is because in community policing you have some kind of forum or setting where the community tells the police what their priorities are in terms of security, and then the police try to address the concerns of the community. This is not the case in UPPs. UPPs are an experience brought from the outside to address the general need of pacification, which is the main issue, in fact, but there is not a systematic attempt to incorporate the demands of the community. And then you have all these problems about funk music and the volume of music. Actually, if you interview, you may have done so, I don't know, but if you interview police commanders, they will tell you that the conflict is within the community, because some people want to have music until 2 or 3 in the morning, and some others say, look, you know, we need to sleep. So it's an internal, but because there was always these external authoritarian power, be they drug dealers or militias or whatever, there is the expectation that the police will now fulfill this role and will tell people what to do, when in fact it should be negotiated within the community. So I think we have a long way to go. We are not in an ideal situation by any stretch of the imagination, but we have to compare with what we had before. And what we had before is people being killed regularly, shootouts occurring every day, people being afraid of taking their kids to school, people being unable to go back home. So comparing to that, it's a huge success. But if you compare it to policemen in Denmark, of course it's not a big success. So I think people are not very realistic, and I blame both sides. I blame the government for being over glossy in their exhibition. Actually not the police heads, not even the Secretary of Public Security, which are sort of modest and reasonable in most of their statements on these issues. But the government as a whole, and part of the press, are embarked in these very glossy coverage of the UPPs, and the UPPs are wonderful, and every UPP officer seems to have a degree in philosophy or what have you, and they love the kids and the kids love them, and this is not realistic, you know. In most countries in the world, poor kids don't like the police. And there is a difficult relationship between the police and poor kids. And that happens in England, as you can see. That happens in many countries. So I think we have to be a lot more realistic. Well, I am taking heed by both sides now, because I have been a police critic for a long time because of this research and for my personal commitment to human rights. So I was even forbidden from entering any police structure or building for some time. Some policemen told me that they were jailed for coming to my classes in the university. So I had a difficult relationship with the police, and I still do sometimes. But I think that these UPPs are a very important step forward. Like, if you read my articles a few years back, some of the things they're doing, it's exactly what we're asking for. We need police to be permanently located in these areas and preventing violence rather than fighting the war on crime. That's what they're doing. So when they do that, are we going to say, no, 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 we don't like it because it's not perfect? I think first it's unfair, and second, if you want to change reality, you have to support when something better than what you had before comes along. So I'm a skeptical by nature, but I think it's been a huge step forward, and now I'm trying to support this initiative so that it gets expanded and consolidated, and we try to change police as a whole. I will tell you openly, because the Secretary of Public Security has already done so, that there is even a proposal that we help the police evaluate the UPPs. This has not been signed, it's not official yet, but there is a possibility that we might be asked to help evaluate the whole process. And we are very willing to do so and willing to help in this process. I've participated in some debates, and the far left, of course, is very critical, and some of their representatives say, oh, you know, these UPPs are the same old thing, you know, we shouldn't accept that, it's government propaganda. And then they find themselves in a very awkward position, because people who live in poor communities are demanding UPPs. And most people who live in the communities with the UPPs support them. Some of them are critical but say, no, it's far better than we had before. And people who live in communities which don't have UPPs are saying, we want the UPP to come along. So if you're an extreme critic of the UPPs, you find yourself in a very awkward position. So in my personal view, the ultimate criterion is the life of people who live in these communities better than it used to be? And the answer is clearly yes. Is it perfect? The answer is clearly no. Can it be improved? Absolutely. So the question is, what can we do to make it better? But it's certainly far better than we used to have. And there is a strategical battle within the police force as to what strategy is going to be followed in the future. So if the people who represent UPPs triumph, we may have a different police in the future. But if they get to be defeated, then the old guard is going to come back, and the BOPE is going to continue to be the reference, and we'll have lots of shootouts and deaths and insecurity. I think Colonel Robson is a very interesting character. He's an anthropologist as well as a policeman. And so he has this vision of cultures and subcultures within the police. And he's committed to changing the police as a whole. So I think and he's not the only one. So as I said before, there's an internal struggle. And I think Colonel Robson represents the more enlightened sector of the police. And the ones who are trying to change it from within. And our experience in Brazil and many other countries in the world is that there's no way you can change an organization if you don't have allies inside it. If you try to change it from the outside without any collaboration from the inside, you're doomed to fail. They will just resist it and nothing will happen.